On today's episode of the AFNet project, we will briefly be discussing the Australian endangered species legislation in comparison to America, the endangered native Australian mammal, the dugong, the impacts of introduced species focusing on the European red fox, as well as sustainable agriculture and climate change.
Endangered species legislation, Australia versus the USA. Endangered species is defined by the American Heritage Science Dictionary 2005 as a plant or animal species existing in such small numbers that it is in danger of becoming extinct, especially such species placed in jeopardy as a result of human activity. These species, which are given the status of endangered, vulnerable, or critically endangered, are listed in Australia under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act of 1999 and in the USA under the Endangered Species Act of 1973. The species listed have been deemed by their country of occupancy that they are of scientific, educational, ecological, and/or recreational value to the country and its people. The main aims of the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act of 1999 is to increase conservation of our country's biodiversity by protecting native species and addressing processes which threaten all levels of biodiversity and implement plans to address those processes. Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act 1999. The table shown on the screen details the criteria used to justify a listing under the Australian legislation as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. The criteria takes into account a number of different factors, such as reduction in population numbers, its geographic distribution, estimated total number of mature individuals, and its probability of extinction in the wild. It also shows the indicative thresholds used to make a decision. The government formed the Endangered Species Program, ESP, in 1989 and enacted the first piece of Australian legislation with the Endangered Species Act in 1992. In 1999, the Endangered Species Act was amended into and replaced by the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act 1999, A. Delgado 2000. The main purpose of the Endangered Species Act of 1973 is to conserve ecosystems which endangered species rely on and put into place plans which conserve such endangered and threatened species and to take appropriate steps to achieve the aims of the treaties and conventions set forth previously in the Act. Piece of legislation has helped many species, which were threatened with extinction at some stage. The bald eagle's population numbers in North America in the 1700s were believed to be around 300 to 500,000, only to decline to 412 nesting pairs in the 1950s, due mainly to DDT pollution. The eagle was then placed on the endangered species list under the Endangered Species Act in the 1970s. Certain recovery plans for the eagle, which included the ban of DDT, and the increase of poaching penalties helped to have the eagle removed from the endangered species list in 1995, after its population numbers neared 100,000 in the 1990s. D. DeFrenza, 2010. The Endangered Species Preservation Act was passed by Congress in 1966. A new Endangered Species Conservation Act was written by Congress in 1969, which included the authorization for the Secretary of Interior to also list foreign species and prohibit the import of products made from those species. In 1973, a completely rewritten Endangered Species Act was passed unanimously under the Nixon government. Congress created the God Squad in 1978, a committee which could exempt selected species from protection, Thoria Institute. Australia didn't have any legislation regarding endangered species until 1992, which could be considered late compared to the American policy, which was enacted in 1966, almost 3 decades prior to the Australian legislation. Also, the fact that the American policy is one simple 46-page piece of legislation compared to the Australian legislation being 900-plus pages in 2 volumes and also concerning other issues. The process of nomination for listing, however, is similar for both but may be different due to differing government structures. Hi, I'm Colleen the kangaroo from the Australian outback. Hi, Colleen. Could Australia benefit from some of the ideas in the US legislation?
Australia could definitely benefit from separating 900-plus page legislation into smaller sections, each detailing one issue only. This will make it easier for anyone in the public to obtain any information needed in regards to endangered species in Australia. The last thing I would want is for an Australian to not be bothered searching through the 900-plus pages of the Act and perhaps go the wrong way about a situation involving native endangered species.
Colleen,
What can Australia do to improve the decline of its endangered and vulnerable species? The Australian government needs to place more of an importance on recovery of endangered species as we are an isolated country and our country is diverse in its native wildlife. A balance between helping the environment and benefiting mankind needs to be reached, just like it was in the US in regards to the bald eagle. DDT may have worked well as a pesticide, but an alternative was found due to the decline in numbers of the bald eagle. D. DeFrenza, 2010. Education, including things such as native roadkill and habitat destruction, should be publicized. Perhaps focusing on vulnerable species as well as endangered species may put a stop to species reaching the endangered or critically endangered status, and may even save the government time and money in regards to recovery plans. Breeding programs have also proven beneficial in regards to endangered species, and more funding needs to be given to institutes willing to undertake a breeding program such as the many zoological parks around Australia. The differences and similarities found between the Australian Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act 1999 and the American Endangered Species Act of 1973 would largely be due to the differences in country and perhaps even the differences in government structures. With a few amendments made to the Australian Act, including the parting of the different sections and the recovery of vulnerable species taking priority, as well as endangered species, it will help make the Act work the way it was enacted to. Australian recovery plans may not work the way American recovery plans do, due to the fact that Australia's land and wildlife differs greatly. Australia needs to find what works for our country, including more funding and research into breeding programs, as well as the identifications of threatening processes and plans to change the outcomes of those particular processes, keeping in mind that some species are just not meant to survive, and that's all a part of natural selection. Regardless, endangered species should be a high priority in the Australian government.
A majestic and rare creature of the sea, the dugong, is an air-breathing aquatic mammal. In the days of the early sailors, dugongs were mistaken for beautiful women and were the core to the mythical stories of the mermaid. Dugong's streamlined bodies are similar to a dolphin. It is completely hairless except for the bristles near its mouth. Although dugongs may have a similar appearance to dolphins, dugongs have molars similar to an elephant which they use to grind their food. The dugong's diet is composed of seagrass, which determines their global distribution. With migratory patterns unique to each individual, the dugong roams the seafloor in search of plentiful food supply. The dugong has few natural predators but has regrettably been hunted and is almost extinct today. Although seagrass beds can be found almost worldwide, dugongs are commonly found here, in the warmer tropical parts of Australia, which surround the top edges of Western Australia, Queensland and along the Northern Territory coastline. Similar environments can be found in the Indian and Pacific Oceans and the waters of Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, seen here highlighted in blue in the map. Tragically, as the human population has grown along Australia's coastline, more of us have started entering the shark's domain, and so too the dugong's domain. Shark nets have been stretched along Australia's coastlines. These nets provide protection to those who play in the water. However, they have quite a detrimental effect on the dugong population. Dugongs are slow-moving and are often victims to boat collisions. As they are air-breathing mammals, the majority of their fatalities are due to drownings in shark nets and fishing nets. Dugongs have very slow breeding patterns. Once a dugong has reached maturity, which takes between 9 and 17 years of age, the dugong will only give birth to one calf every 3 to 7 years. Unfortunately, due to human interference and their slow breeding patterns, dugongs are listed as endangered in both Australia and internationally. Helen Marsh from James Cook University Townsville worked with a number of other experts in their field to conduct research to determine the decline of dugongs in North Queensland.
The team and I gathered abundance information by using aerial surveys and dugongs caught as a bycatch in shark nets. We were able to estimate that this region has supported around 72,000 dugongs in the early 60s.
The population growth rates on dugongs are very sensitive, and human activity puts a great strain on these majestic mammals. Seagrass beds are easily destroyed by human interaction, via mining, trawling, dredging inland and coastal clearings, and land renovation, which also indirectly damage seagrass meadows by increasing the turbidity of the water and reducing the amount of vital sunlight required for the growth of seagrass. Even the slightest decrease in the mature dugongs can cause a decrease in their population.
During the 35 years of the information that we have used from this experiment, the amount of sites and bycatches of dugongs have decreased from 8.7% per year.
This decline is devastating to even imagine. Educational programs have been created to increase our knowledge on these precious marine creatures. The Australian Government and local councils have endorsed several other conservation strategies, including habitat protection and marine parks, speed restrictions for boats to urge people to slow down, and research programs. As an international conservation strategy, the Samoan Islands have joined with the Pacific Islands to launch 2011 to be the Year of the Dugong, to help raise awareness and promote the need to protect these majestic mammals as well as their coastal and marine ecosystems. A recent study in 2008 has shown that most of the Australian populations of dugongs were found in the Gulf of Carpentaria, North Queensland, with the Wellesley Island area providing the sanctuary for approximately 7,000 individual dugongs. The dugong truly is extraordinarily extravagant.
Ever since the early colonization, when the British arrived to Australia, they brought along many different kinds of animals and plant species. Most of the species have become pests and have escalated in population numbers, making it very hard to have them under management. An example of an introduced species is the red fox. The red fox was introduced purely for recreational hunting in the 1870s. Population numbers have increased and gone out of control within the last 100 years. The spread of the European red fox across Australia was closely linked to that of rabbits, and today the distribution of both species largely coincide. However, some areas such as the tropical north and some offshore islands have remained untouched by the red fox. European red fox are able to survive in many types of habitats, urban, alpine and arid areas, which conveniently is abundance of their prey. With the fast spread of the European red fox, small animals such as ground-nesting birds, bilbies and green turtles have declined, and the fox is thought to be the significant contributor. Many species are now threatened, including the manly fowl, the brittle-nailed tail wallaby and the night parrot. Foxes also have negative impacts on a farmer's economic status as they prey on poultry, kid goat, which can cause major financial losses.